Hi, folks, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the farmers' protests, primarily in Europe, but I suppose it could apply to really any first world country. Now, the globalist media sort of tend to portray these farmers as not really having any argument, or they're just troublemakers, or they're Nazis, or so we know straight away that the globalists are trying to disingenuously represent the farmers in a negative light, while representing the quite evil globalist machinations in a positive light by contrast. And they're hiding behind global warming, climate change, and all these sorts of things. We're only trying to do good. The experts, not us. We didn't. It's the experts. The experts said so. We're only doing what the experts. That usual. And so that it's all a load of fucking bullshit just from that attempt. But I'll try and sort of boil it down, and I'm going to maybe oversimplify a little bit here, but it goes like this. Effectively, in the first world, the farmers are being told that they have to reduce quite substantially the amount of fertilizers and the sort of fertilizers and, say, pesticides, things like this that they use in their crop production. And there's two arguments used here. One is the claim is that the pesticides and the fertilizers add to climate change. This is the claim. It hasn't been proven, and they use politicized two-bit flunky scientists to make those claims. So that's on one side, and the other is and inherent in that is alleged pollution and so on. On the other side, they're talking about healthy food. Organic food is healthy or healthier. Therefore, if we remove all these chemicals, then it's going to be much healthier. Now, in depending on where you go in the world, and the quality of the soil, the climate, things like that, as soon as you take away a move to a primarily, not completely, but primarily organic farming, then your crop production, your agricultural yield declines by between 30 and 40 or even 50%. So there's a very substantial reduction in yield now, and this is not just raw crops like you just grow wheat or grains or something. This has a knock-on effect through the things like the amount of milk you produce, the amount of byproducts, say butter and cream and cheese, and all that stuff. So it has a knock-on effect there, because you can't support herds that are like herds of cows and sheep or whatever if you can't use certain feed, and on it goes. Now, so the European Union, or the globalist cabal is trying to enforce, without holding a vote, by the way. The people aren't being asked; it's just being imposed on them, as all ideological things are. It's just imposed without reason. There's no cause given, or there's no consultation. This is what you're going to do, motherfuckers. And again, all part of the globalist cabal, and their attitude that they can ride. Representative democracy has been done away with, so they can ride roughshod over whoever they want. And if you disagree, they'll just accuse you of being a Nazi. So there's that. So there's claim that global pollution and climate change contributions through chemicals and cleaner food. Okay, let's assume those are true. Let's just assume for the moment, but they're only being imposed in Western countries. Only in Western countries. There's a few third world attempts have been made, which have ended disastrously, such as in Sri Lanka, as an example, where they went to organic farming there, the mad idiots. And there's some primarily agricultural society, for fuck's sake. It's not like their first world country or something. And they went, and the whole thing collapsed in disaster, as anyone could have predicted it would, particularly in a primarily agricultural. There's a lot of people derive their income and their livelihood from agriculture. So you've got this massive attempt by Sri Lankans, to desert Sri Lanka to any country in the world just to get the fuck out of there, because it's a basket case. I mean, it wasn't a rich country to begin with. So now, but just to show how just disingenuous it is, once these things are imposed, or if they're trying to impose them, they then import all the same products that they're trying to kill off in the Western economy. They then import those products from third world countries that are still using all the pesticides and the fertilizers and so on, and where the standards and the quality control in terms of food hygiene and food quality is much lower than it is in the West. So they're saying to the West, I mean, this is how fucking disingenuous it is. So the globalists saying to the Western farmer, well, you can't use those fertilizers and pesticides, and so we're gonna tell you can't use that. We're going to fine the living crap out if you do it, or put you in prison if you continue to do it. But we're going to allow these third world countries. We'll arrange import deals with these third world countries that's using all those same pesticides we say that you can't use, and we'll import grain and foodstuffs from those countries again that have a much lower standard of hygiene. So it just shows how disingenuous they are. Now the farmers in Europe are quite reasonably complaining about this. So they say, well, two things. One is you're driving up our cost of production, and then you're bringing in much cheaper products from third world countries that are using the same pesticides you've outlawed in this country. So they're quite reasonably up in arms. Now, on the other side of it, the advocates that are arguing against the farmers are saying, well, European agriculture is already subsidised. Things like extra tax breaks for use of diesel fuel, for example, that might go into tractors and so on. So they're arguing, well, if we take away those subsidies, you're uneconomical anyway. Now, there's some different. If you look at the yield of, and I did some research on this, and now I'm looking for the bit of paper on my desk and I can't see it, but I had the numbers on here. The product, the yield per acre from fertilizers, which began to be sort of more widely used, as in chemical fertilizers, more widely used in the late 1800s, has hugely increased crop production of all crops, and the ability to run larger herds of livestock and so on. So once you remove those, there's a very substantial reduction in crop output. Now, if you look at, say, places like Holland and France, particularly in value add type produce, exotic cheeses and all that sort of stuff, they're quite big exporters. They not only satisfy the local market, but they export quite a bit as well. Also in terms of meat, pork, things like that. So if you reduce that production by, say, 30 to 35%, that's huge. That has huge implications. And then to go to the third world and say, well, okay, if you use those fertilizers in the third world, that doesn't matter. Then it's the whole thing is just an outrageous con. It's a fucking scam of the first order. I mean, it just shows how evil the globalists are, in my opinion, at least, doing this. But it doesn't. It's not just confined to. It's not just confined to agricultural produce and agricultural production. It's also in relation to manufacturing. If you look at the cost of generating a kilowatt of electricity in China or India, and then the cost of generating a kilowatt of electricity where the Green New Deal is being forced and imposed upon us for purely ideological reasons, then they're something like 1/6 of the cost of generating a kilowatt of electricity. So given that vast differential in cost, differential in wages, lower standards of emissions and lower standard of discharges into lakes and rivers and things like that, then it's much cheaper to manufacture in a third world country than it is in a first world country, particularly the lower end of the value add scale. Robotics and AI might be different, but in terms of actually hard manufacturing physical objects, then it's cheaper to do. But it doesn't need to be so. If there was no Green New Deal, for example, the cost of electricity and energy generally would be much more competitive, much lower here. We'd be paying the same, if not a lesser cost. In the case of Australia, Australia's got vast amounts of good quality coal, and it's close to the surface on a relative, much closer than say it is in Alsace or Lorraine or somewhere in the Saar area of Europe. But the coal is much cheaper to get at here in Australia, and so electricity and energy in Australia could very easily be very cheap. Sure, when the technology comes along to replace it, fine. Then we can transition to that. But right now, Australia could have very cheap electricity, and a lot of the manufacturing, with it the jobs that have been sent offshore to China and India, could have stayed in Australia if the energy had been cheaper, plus the technology and the know-how and so on. So it's a very willful, very determined attempt by the globalists to export jobs away from the West and to create artificially high costs. Now, if climate change and so on is so bad, why is it that only the West must stop using fossil fuels, but China and India, the biggest emitters in the world, that's okay for them to do it? So clearly it's a very, very disingenuous sort of thing, but it's all part of this to impose artificially high costs, rent, real estate, or artificially high costs across the board, and in many ways, in order to change the economy, change the way we live, change how we exist. But also farmers are independent agents. They're self-employed independent agents, and I think this is, as well as a scam of the first order. Ideologically, it's a way of destroying what the globalists would see as independent people with agency, and that are not reliant or completely reliant or controlled by the government. This is also part of a way of controlling farmers directly. This is the fertilizer you can and can't use. These are pesticides you can. These are the products you're allowed to sell. These are the things. So they can put farmers out of business just by importing third world stuff, third world products, for example, which is what they're doing, which is part of why the farmers in Europe, France and elsewhere, are protesting. Why do you restrict us here, but then bring in all this agricultural products from countries that have no such restrictions? It's hardly fair and hardly reasonable. But it's a globalist cabal scam, in my view. You've been attached to us today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.